Alright, what is up, dudes? So, this time we're going to talk about a pretty heavy topic. A lot of people think about this on a daily basis, including myself. The dreaded T word. We're going to talk about tier lists, okay? So, usually I try and structure my videos and the things I talk about to allow people of every skill level to find value in what I'm talking about. This is definitely geared towards new players and just some things that I want to make sure that you look out for when it comes to this subject, okay? But before we can even talk about tier lists and their impact and stuff on the community, we need to talk about what they used to be and what they are now. The way that tier lists are created, or should be created and were created, basically, so you have a community of players who all play a particular game, right? And not really a community, but like a group of trusted community members, usually top players of that game, who get together and they basically theory craft, right? They take a look at all of the characters in a particular game, and they say, okay, so if we had two players of the exact same skill level playing these two characters optimally against each other in a 1st to 10, which character on average would come out on top? How many matches would they win in the 1st to 10? It wasn't a perfect science, of course. There was still opinion, there was still disputation and all of that stuff, but it was mostly based upon the tools that the characters have, the strengths, the weaknesses, frame data, to the best of their knowledge and stuff like that, and how they interact with each character's things. They do that with every character. So they take Ryu and they pit him against every single character and do the same process for every character, 1st to 10, optimal play, same skill level. How many matches out of that 1st to 10 would this character win? How many would they lose? And if you take a look at that character and you say, okay, well, they win this match this much and this match this much, and then you take all of the characters and you say, okay, this character wins the majority of these hypothetical 1st to 10s in the entire game, therefore top tier. This character loses to pretty much every character in the cast, therefore bottom tier. And that's how you end up with a tier list of where your character sits on it and how strong or weak they are, right? So that's how tier lists used to be. Nowadays, anybody with an internet connection and a couple of brain cells to rub together and make a little bit of friction and an IQ hovering somewhere around room temperature can go to TierMaker, find any template for any characters in any game they want. Not even characters in a game. They could do a tier list on anything. You've seen it everywhere. Just put them all in order the way they feel like. And it's very heavily weighted toward opinion. It's less about the data. It's less about, breaking things down nowadays than it used to be. And tier lists are a dime a dozen. You see them everywhere. So we're going to talk a little bit about that and why, I think that is, and what kind of value we can pull out of that, right? And again, this is a lot for the new players because there are some traps you can fall into when it comes to tier lists if you're new, and I'm here to kind of help you avoid those pitfalls, right? So number one, we have to talk about your character choice and things like that, whether or not you should let a tier list determine what character you play. Now, you've probably heard this a million times from a lot of different voices in the FGC. Just pick the character you think is cool. Don't base on a tier list whether or not you should play a character, ever. Just whichever character you think is the coolest, pick them, try them, play them. If it doesn't turn out to be the kind of character you want to play, you can switch characters anytime if you feel like it. But if you want to stick with that character, by all means, stick with them. Fury Cat, stop licking my drink. You're addicted to condensation. But yeah, just pick the character that you want to play. Don't let tier lists influence what character you do play. No matter what character you pick, you're going to get wrecked when you first start out. I'm sorry, it doesn't matter how good a character is. Whether you have an easier time or a harder time, you're going to face a lot of loss when you first start with a fighting game. So ask yourself the question, what is worse? Picking a top tier character and losing over and over and over with that character who you don't really care about, you just pick them because they're top tier, or trying to learn a character you think is really cool and going through the same process. You're not going to have fun playing the top tier character because you don't care about them. You have no attachment to that character. They're not super cool to you. They're just really strong. Going through the grind with a character you really give a shit about is going to be much more rewarding when you continuously lose, and you're going to keep wanting to play the game because you care about getting good with that character. That's one aspect of why you shouldn't let tiers influence your character choice. Now, beyond character choice when it comes to tier lists, this is where we get into a certain area that's kind of gray. Again, you're going to find tier lists everywhere. And if you're not ingrained in the community already, or if you're new to fighting games in general, you're not going to know what voices to listen to, you know. So if you take top players' opinions are very valuable. Do not get me wrong. You know, a tier list made by Justin Wong is a hell of a lot more valuable than a tier list made by, like, I don't know, Johnny Big Balls 69 420 no scope, right? Everyone can make tier lists, and they're all opinion. Top player opinions are much more valuable because they're looking at things more objectively than other people. Because, again, Johnny, whatever the hell I just said, is jumping on and saying, I'm going to make a tier list for this game, and man, this character really pisses me off, and I hate fighting them, and I'm bad at this match, so I'm going to put them in top tier because they give me a hard time. They're not looking at it in a way that is coherent to actual fighting game knowledge. They're looking at it as, I'm frustrated by this character more than any other character, so I'm going to make them top tier. And there's a lot of people out there who do that. You have to be able to differentiate between what are trusted voices and what are just whiners. And even saying that, like with top player opinion and things like that being more valuable, those are still opinions of one person, and they can be disputed as well. And they are also, although more cohesive than a random fighting game player online deciding I'm going to go on and make a tier list, it's still intrinsic to their experience in some way. So when you're navigating the sea of endless tier lists for all the fighting games you want to play, you really want to take everything with a grain of salt. And the people that you can trust are usually the ones that come out immediately and say, you know, this is just my opinion. This, you know, is just how I feel. It's not fact. Just make sure you listen to those people for the most part. Here's the other pitfall you don't want to fall into. It goes along the lines of the character choice, but it gets a little deeper than that, right? The thing about tier lists is, yes, they exist. Tiers do exist in fighting games. What you want to be careful of the most, do not take the information from top player opinions tier lists and use that as a crutch or as a pre-prepared excuse. So what I'm getting at here is you'll see it even from old school fighting game players. This is not just a new fighting game player thing. This has been around forever. It's still around, even in seasoned players. If they lose a match to a character who was placed at a higher tier than theirs by, say, a top level Japanese player says this character is busted, and you're playing a character 2 tiers lower than that character and lose to it, and you say, oh, well, this character's busted, that's obviously why I lost. Any way to blame a loss on anything but their own gameplay, people like this will use, and tier lists are the enablers from hell for that. So you have to be really careful not to fall into the mentality that I play a weaker character than these other players, therefore when I lose, that's the reason. It's not. Now, I also wanted to talk about specifically new fighting games when they come out. This is something that happens every single time a new fighting game comes out, and it happens fast. It happens almost too fast for you to react. Tier lists just come in like a flood. Let's take a look at Melty Blood Type Lumina, right? It was out for a week. Now, let me even back that up, actually. There were tier lists made for Melty Blood Type Lumina by a couple of people based upon the trailers before anybody even touched the game. And there's a few reasons for this. Number one, it must be said, tier list videos, tier list tweets, things like that attract attention. Now, I'm not saying that's the motivator for most of these people, but making tier lists and making tier list videos and things like that generates views, generates clicks, generates buzz around your content. I am fully convinced that if this video, this one that you're watching right now, performs well, it's likely because just the topic of tier list was raised. It has nothing to do, I'm not even making a tier list in this video, I'm just talking about them. And there is a very good chance that that alone brings in traffic. That's not my intention with this, but that is almost inevitable with this topic. There are many people out there who are very opportunist in that. They will make a tier list because it's going to get them views and comments and likes, dislikes. Doesn't matter whether you agree with them or disagree with them. They are getting attention. Now, on to the reason that people make tier lists that early that isn't simply for social media growth, right? Fighting game players are obsessed with what is strong in a particular fighting game that they're playing. And there's a couple of reasons why. There are some players who will only play top tiers, or will only play the strongest characters in game. It's just about the functionality of the character, whether or not they're good, whether they can pick them up and just win with them. And for the other types of fighting game players who aren't interested in the characters that are top tier, the reason why we're still obsessed with what's strong is because we want to know what we're dealing with. We want to know what's strong so we know what to look out for. We want to know what's strong, what characters are strong, so we can develop strategies against those characters and learn some counterplay strategies against them. So in that sense, people are just really grasping at the smallest amount of information we have about new fighting games just to try and glean a little bit of what we're going to have to deal with as far as character strength. And that I totally understand. But you still have to take those with a grain of salt, even more so than the other, the top player tier lists and stuff for established games, especially for new games, because it takes a very long time for a fighting games meta to develop, especially nowadays with patches and little tweaks they make to characters that can totally buff or nerf them. It's all up to the developers, right? On the one hand, it's made an atmosphere where tier lists can be made every few months because so many things change that tiers will change. So people are cultivating that as well and saying, oh, well, I can make another tier list video in a few months because they're going to change these things. And everybody will be interested to hear the opinions of certain people post-patch, But it's very important to understand that, yes, it takes a while for a fighting game meta to develop, even ones that didn't get patches. So take a look at Super Turbo. Again, let's talk about that. If I'm going off the top of my head here, I'm not looking up any facts or anything, but I'm pretty sure it took decades for people to realize that T-Hawk was like top tier in Super Turbo. This is a game that's been around since before a lot of you were born, probably, that are watching this, because I tend to bring in a lot of new fighting game players. But, T-Hawk was considered low tier for a long time. Then suddenly, out of nowhere, he went to the top because of some new tech discovered. That is an old-ass game. And it didn't get patches, it didn't get updates. That was the last version of that game. Think about that. Think about how long certain games have been out that have had tier lists and established metas, and have changed since then. So then you look at something like Melty Blood Type Lumina. The game has been out for 2 weeks. People have already put tier lists out. A lot of them are very different looking. That tier list is going to change the moment that a patch drops. It could change next week because of new tech being discovered for a different character or something like that. So you can't put too much emphasis on it. And here is the number one rule you should remember about tier lists. They are merely a tool. They are a tool for you to reference and say, okay, this is what I should be looking for from this character. This is why this character is good on this tier list. There's a counterplay to it. We need to learn about it. Also, tier lists are not for new players, and they're pretty much not for intermediate players either. Tier lists only really start to matter when you are at the top level of fighting game players. And it always kills me. It's very absurd to think about. The people who put the most stock into tier lists and how much they mean and how important they are usually not the people who they actually should matter to. Most of the people who will reference tier lists or talk about tier lists or talk about, where their character is on the tier list or why this matchup is bad or whatever, are people who are at mid-level or lower. The upper level of players, yes, they're aware tier lists are there, but they know how to use them. They understand to respect every character. They understand how to work their way around every problem, no matter what tier they're fighting in. Bottom line is, tier lists are fun. That's what they're supposed to be. They're meant to generate discussion about a game. And it's a very easy way to generate discussion. Whether or not that discussion is helpful or toxic depends on the community. But for the most part, tier lists are just there to get people talking. I don't give a shit if you put Akia at the bottom. I'm still playing her, so take that. This is a lot of the reason why when I do tier list, I do it based on who I think is cool rather than who I think is strong. Because I'm not going to come out and say, I think this character's strong because of this, this, and this without having full knowledge. Because that's how you look like an idiot. A general rule of thumb is never to make an observation unless you have all of the facts. And I don't have all of the facts about Melty Blood type Lumina. So I have my opinions on who I think is strong and who I think is not so strong. But I would not begin to come out and try and put a tier list together, because whether it generates me views or clicks or whatever, I can't sacrifice my integrity as a fighting game player and as a human being by making a tier list when I don't have all of the information readily available to make it as close to an objective list as I can. Regardless of that, again, thank you guys for watching. I hope this really helped out some of the new players and some of the mid-level players too. If you were kind of basing too much of how you play or how you think about fighting games on tier lists, because you really need to take a step back and realize that this is something that has been a phenomenon for a very long time in the fighting game community, and most of the time doesn't have any bearing on the actual match you're playing. Thanks you guys for watching. I'll see you next time. Peace.